There is a frequency that only opens after midnight. Most people spin right past it, a wall of static between the stations. But if you stop, if you hold there, sometimes a voice comes through. And some of those voices have been gone for a very long time. Welcome back to the midnight frequency. Turn the lights down. Put the world on hold. For the next few hours, it's just you, the dial, and the dark. What you're about to hear are the calls that came in on the nights nobody could explain, ordinary people, on empty highways and in quiet houses, all reaching for the same phone to say the same thing. I've never told anyone this before. Some of these stories are strange. Some are sad. And a few of them still don't have an ending. So settle in. Keep the lights where they are. The lines are open, and tonight, it seems, the dead still have something to say. Let's begin. The late-night silence was only broken by the distant hum of traffic on Interstate 8. I had been on duty at the Yuma service station for hours. 2 shifts had already passed since my coworkers left, but there hadn't been a single customer to serve. The old building groaned around me, its walls painted faded orange to match the desert sun that was just beginning to dip below the horizon. It wasn't unusual, I knew these stretches of night could be lonely. But then, at 3:06 a.m., my phone rang, a soft, insistent chirp that made my skin prickle with sudden unease. A late-night radio show had been airing from somewhere in the country, and they often invited callers to share their eerie experiences. I hesitated for just a moment before answering. Hello. My voice was quiet, unsure of what to expect. A breathy male voice on the other end said, "Is this Jim at Yuma service station?" I nodded, even though he couldn't see me, and replied, "Yes, that's right. How can I help?" He began to tell his story, a tale that was a mix of mundane details and eerie suggestions. He had a simple account, just a trip into town with some friends who were curious about the old service station, one they believed might still be haunted. But as he spoke, my mind lingered on something more peculiar, something unsettling. It was in his description of the empty gas pumps, the flickering lights, and the cold air that crept down my neck despite the warmth outside. The silence, too, seemed different somehow, a thick, oppressive quiet. The caller described a group of men entering the station late at night, their faces twisted with the thrill of the unknown. They wanted to record some footage for a local paranormal investigation group they belonged to. But as he detailed what had happened next, my ears straining harder for any sound that wasn't there. About an hour after we got inside, he continued, we started to set up our cameras. There were 4 of us, you know, for balance, and each one positioned in a corner. The room was dim but the light seemed brighter somehow. I couldn't help but shiver as I listened, feeling like my own skin was tingling with cold. And then, he paused, his voice barely above a whisper. One of them noticed something strange on their camera footage. But here's the thing, none of us saw it. Not at first. My grip tightened around the phone, the lines crinkling with the tension in my fingers. It's hard to explain, he said, his tone growing more urgent now. But when we fast-forwarded through a stretch of night footage, there was this person. Just standing near the door. An older man, dressed warmly for sure and wearing an old-fashioned coat. He wasn't in any of our footage though, no one else saw him. For a moment, I thought it might be over, that he had just ended the call. But then came another question, his voice thick with dread, how, did you not see it? Because on your camera, Jim, there's no one there at all. Except for this man in the footage. He's always there, and yet, none of us saw him. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. But maybe it's just my imagination, he said, his voice a whisper, or maybe, someone or something is keeping watch. And we're not alone after all. It's strange to think about, isn't it? My eyes fell on the clock, the numbers barely visible in the darkened room. 3:18 a.m. I've been through these tapes over and over, he added softly. Each time I find him just standing there, motionless, looking right into one of our cameras. A shiver ran down my spine as I thought about the man, unseen but ever present on tape. And then came that final, haunting sentence, he's always there, Jim. In the quiet of St. Louis, Missouri, the night was a blanket of darkness, thick with secrets. At the old industrial complex on the outskirts of town, the clock struck 12. I, John, had taken the night shift as a security guard, a job I took mostly for the convenience it offered to my young family back in our cozy apartment. The building, once bustling with life, now lay silent and empty, its walls whispering tales of past days. As I made my way through the labyrinthine corridors, the only sound was the static crackle of the radio. I had been walking for what felt like hours when a peculiar chill crept up my spine. It wasn't a cold wind, it was more like a presence, heavy and unnerving. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, lighting the empty spaces, but nothing moved. Just as I started to think maybe the temperature drop was just an anomaly of the old building's heating system, I heard it, a faint whisper, floor 9. It wasn't my imagination, I could hear it clearly, repeated 3 times like a mantra. I shivered and quickened my pace, ignoring the growing unease. The whispers were getting closer, louder almost, but still indistinct. My flashlight flickered, casting long shadows that danced along the walls. When the light went out entirely, I had to turn off the emergency lights too. Panic began to set in, making it harder to think straight. Suddenly, a door at the end of a hall opened by itself. It groaned loudly, as if protesting this intrusion, revealing an empty office that should have been locked. As I approached, the whispers grew into words, "Stay away from floor 9." A chill ran down my back, and my heart pounded in my chest. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone to call headquarters, only to realize it was already ringing. The caller ID showed an unlisted number. The voice on the other end was urgent but distant, like it came from outside the building. "You must not go there," said a man's voice, his words hesitant yet insistent. "Floor 9 is dangerous." Without thinking, I asked, "But why is only the security guard allowed?" The silence that followed felt endless, before the voice whispered back, "Because those who stay too long never return." I hung up and tried to focus on leaving, but my feet were rooted to the spot. The whispers returned, louder now, echoing through the hallways as if mocking me. As I turned to flee, a cold draft swept across my neck. My flashlight flared to life just in time to see the door slam shut with a resounding bang behind me. Panic overwhelmed reason as I stumbled towards the staircase leading down from the ground floor. The words echoed in my ears, "Floor 9 is dangerous." I turned back, but the door was locked and bolted. A shiver ran through my body, a mix of fear and determination propelling me forward. With one last glance at the door, I descended into the shadows, the whispers growing louder until they merged with the sound of my own ragged breathing. At the bottom of the stairs, floor 9 was visible, an ominous darkness stretching out like an abyss. I took a single, hesitant step towards it and the static on the radio grew suddenly deafening as if cutting off the last connection to reality. The floor groaned beneath me, and the whispers became a cacophony that drowned out everything else. And then nothing. Static crackled over the airwaves, making a soft hissing sound in the dimly lit room. It was 3:04 a.m., and Nurse Sarah Thompson lay on her cot, trying to block out the persistent scratching of her pen against the night shift logbook. She glanced at the clock. How long had it been since she last checked? More than an hour, she guessed, as the silence seemed to stretch into eternity. A shiver ran down her spine. Was that a faint creak from somewhere far below? Sarah's flashlight beam danced across the walls of the old hospital ward. She knew better than to entertain such notions, but tonight felt different. A heavy weight settled in her stomach, and she swallowed hard, focusing on the sterile, familiar surroundings. Sarah's shift partner had taken leave last week for an unknown reason. No one knew where he was now. The silence was oppressive, a tangible presence that clung to every corner of the small room. She sighed, adjusting her headphones over her ears, listening intently but hearing only static and the occasional distant siren. Suddenly, the phone rang, like a ghostly echo in the dead of night. Sarah froze, her heart pounding. This was no ordinary night. Something felt off. She hesitated for a moment before answering, her voice barely audible into the receiver. "Scranton Hospital, nurse on call," she said, her hand trembling. "Nurse Thompson." "I need to speak with someone about what happened tonight," said a deep, urgent voice, its tone almost frantic. Sarah's skin prickled as the caller's words seemed to hang in the air like a heavy fog. "Yes," she replied, trying to keep her tone steady. "I was working as a nurse here years ago. I was on night shift like you, and it wasn't long after you started your job, something happened. It changed everything." The caller paused, giving Sarah time to digest the strange request. "What did you mean by, something happened? Did someone die?" she asked cautiously. "No," came the quiet response. "But there was a patient, a woman named Emily." Sarah's breath caught in her throat as the caller's voice continued in a somber tone. "Emily was a good woman. We all liked her here back then." A pause followed, and Sarah could almost imagine the caller looking at an old photograph. "She died under mysterious circumstances, but something strange occurred afterward." "What do you mean by strange?" she pressed. "The night after she passed, I heard her calling for help from inside a room down the hall," said the voice. "I couldn't get anyone else to go in there. The nurse on shift that night didn't want to check it out. I left just as you arrived today, knowing something wasn't right." Sarah felt cold sweat trickling down her back, but she forced herself to maintain a calm demeanor. "Can you tell me which room specifically?" she asked. "Room 217. The nurse who was on shift the night Emily died. I don't know why no one went in after." The caller's voice broke off abruptly as if they were caught at the edge of their world, and Sarah could almost hear a gasp over the static. "Someone is there now," whispered the voice. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, her heart pounding like mad drums inside her chest. "I don't know how to explain it, but someone is helping me." Before Sarah could respond, the line went dead, leaving only the static on the airwaves and the sound of her own labored breathing. She stared at the phone as if expecting it to ring again, but all was quiet except for the distant hum of a single air conditioner. Sarah sat up abruptly, the fear gripping her like an icy hand. Room 217, where would Emily's ghost lead? And why did she want help tonight? The questions echoed in Sarah's mind as she looked down at the logbook, the pencil poised uncertainly above the blank page. The phone line hummed with static, barely registering over the whisper of the evening breeze. It was 3 a.m., and I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister was just out of reach, lurking in the shadows of the small motels in Tucumcari, New Mexico. Sarah's voice cracked through the receiver like ice shattering at dawn. "Good night, this is Sarah from Tucumcari calling." She hesitated, and I could almost hear her shiver over the line. "I've been having some strange things happen." The motel clerk and me immediately knew what was coming, a visitor to my establishment, a guest who checked into room 108 every night at exactly midnight. But something about Sarah's voice made it feel different this time. I started noticing him 2 months ago, she began. He's always the same, tall, dark hair, dressed in a suit, but he never stays. My stomach tightened. A man in a suit was rare enough, but this one was not your ordinary guest. What do you mean by never stays? I asked. Sarah cleared her throat. At first, it didn't seem unusual, people come and go from the desert. But each morning, his luggage is still there, he just disappears without a trace. A cold wind cut through my office, though it should have been warm inside with the heater on full blast. What did you see? I asked. Nothing, she whispered. I mean, everything. His presence was overwhelming. The room itself seemed to pulse at night, like there were tiny eyes watching me. A shiver ran down my spine. I knew these stories often had a rational explanation. Yet, Sarah's voice held a hint of something more. Can you describe the last time he visited? Yes, she said slowly. It was 2 nights ago. Just before midnight, his car parked in front of the office. He checked in, got to room 108, no unusual behavior at all. I was closing up for the night when it happened. My mind raced as Sarah continued. I locked everything down and went back into the office. The phone rang. An empty line, just static. I picked up, nothing but a faint whisper of voices, like they were laughing, in my room. Room 108. The phone dropped from my fingers, landing with a soft thud as the silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's voice faded away into the background, replaced by only the static on the line. And then, it returned. I woke up this morning to a call from room 108, silent again. But when I went in, everything's in place. Same suitcase, same spot on the bed where he always Saturday. A chill raced down my spine as I heard Sarah's voice tremble. The worst part, it's like watching a movie unfold through someone else's eyes. There are times when I think I see him walking down the hallways, but then you turn around and he just isn't there. My office was spinning, the world closing in on me as if by the weight of her words. Did anyone ever investigate who might be living in room 108? No, Sarah said with a catch in her voice. But I keep thinking about it. What if something is trying to tell us something? And we just can't see it? I felt like I was being dragged into the darkness, pulled away from my sanity. Sarah, did you try talking to anyone else? Not really, she admitted. It's too late at night for most people to be calling in, and besides, they'd probably think I'm crazy. The line went dead before I could ask more. My hand hovered over the phone, unsure if I had the courage to make that call again. And then, it rang once more, room 108. The sound echoed through my office like a death knell, the static cutting off as abruptly as it began. Don't touch that dial. Stay with me, the next one is worse. In the quiet of an ungodly hour, as 2 a.m. clung to the sky like ink, something began to stir within the old brick walls of Dodge City High School. It was a school that had seen better days, its paint peeling, its windows misted over with the ghosts of laughter and whispers, but tonight, it was silent, locked tight, save for one peculiar thing, a janitor's name tag still swinging slightly on an empty classroom door. The janitor, Mr. Jenkins, always worked late to ensure no light leaked from the hallways to the neighborhood after hours. Today had been just another day in Dodge City, nothing out of the ordinary until he heard it. A soft whisper, barely audible above the hum of fluorescent lights left on for maintenance, echoed through the empty corridors. He brushed it off at first, chalky hands busy with their work. But as the night deepened, those whispers grew louder, more insistent. It was the voice of a child, clear and unaccused, calling out from the shadows. Mr. Jenkins. Mr. Jenkins. Jenkins paused, his mind racing. He'd been working here long enough to know that late nights in this old building were bound to conjure up oddities. But these voices, they felt too real. They filled him with a creeping dread that refused to be shaken off. With a heavy sigh, he pushed open the door to room 207, where the whispers seemed to emanate from. The classroom was empty and dark as he entered, save for an old chalkboard with ghostly letters fading on its surface, "Don't go in there." The handiwork of an overzealous student, perhaps. Yet, the words carried a weight he couldn't ignore. Jenkins shone his flashlight around the room, his eyes scanning every corner, but nothing was out of place. "Hello?" he called softly into the darkness. There was no response, only the faintest fluttering sound as if something was skittering away. He stepped closer to one desk in particular, number 15, where the whispers seemed strongest. As he leaned down to inspect under the table, his flashlight caught a glimpse of movement just out of reach. Just a mouse, Jenkins told himself, straightening up with a dismissive wave. But then, as if mocking him, the voice spoke again, "Stay away. Stay away." The janitor felt a chill slide up his spine. There was something here, something that didn't want to be disturbed. His flashlight flickered once before going out, leaving him in darkness. Panicked now, he fumbled for his phone and called the main office. "Dodge City High School. I need to speak with the headmaster, please." "It's urgent." He hesitated, knowing this would bring the whole school into disarray, but he couldn't shake off that nagging feeling of something unexplained. Something strange is happening. Before he could say more, a sudden crackling noise filled his earpiece. A low, raspy whisper cut through the static, "Don't leave." "Not yet." Jenkins stared at the phone in shock. The voice was back, stronger this time, and it carried an ominous edge that made his skin crawl. He dropped the phone, backing away from the desk as if he could retreat into the darkness. The whispers turned to shrieks now, echoing across the empty room like a warning. Jenkins turned, running for the door, only to find it locked. Panicked, he pounded on the door with both fists. "Open! Let me out!" But his shouts fell on deaf ears. There was no reply from the office, no one at all. The shrieks grew louder, more insistent, and Jenkins knew he had to act fast. He rummaged in his utility belt until his fingers closed around a long-handled plunger, the kind used for clearing pipes. With it, he jabbed into the lock, hoping to dislodge whatever was holding him captive. "Give me back." The voice was desperate now, and as he twisted the handle with increasing force, a sharp click sounded. The door swung open, and Jenkins stumbled out, gasping for breath. He raced down the hall, his heart pounding, until he reached the main office, but it was empty. No one answered the calls, no one came to help. He darted past classrooms, each shadowy corner a reminder of the whispers that followed him. In the end, he found himself back at room 207, facing the chalkboard where those words still glowed, "Don't go in there." "Why? Why did I come here?" he whispered to no one, his mind racing with unanswered questions and lingering dread. As he turned to leave, a new whisper caught his ear. It was faint but unmistakable. "Stay." The voice faded into the night, leaving Jenkins alone once more, trapped between fear and curiosity. He stepped back inside, closing the door behind him, and then, slowly, he made his way down the dark hall, his flashlight flickering ominously against the walls until it finally died, plunging him into complete darkness. And in that silence, a single, chilling whisper lingered on, "Don't leave. Not yet." In the stillness of an early autumn night in Fargo, North Dakota, there was nothing out of place on the deserted highway. The dispatcher, Tom, sat in his small office at City Hall, surrounded by maps and emergency codes. His shift had been quiet until the phone rang for what seemed like the nth time. A local number flashed across the screen. He picked it up without a second thought. "Hello," his voice crackled over the static-filled line, "Fargo Emergency Services. How can I help you tonight?" The caller's breath was ragged, and their words were barely audible through the line. I am at 43rd Street. Old Mill Road. It's not right." Tom frowned, his brow creasing as he took notes. "Can you please tell me your name and your location again? I want to make sure I have everything right here on file." Rebecca. Old Mill Road, the voice stuttered, growing fainter with each breath. "Rebecca, is there anything specific we need to address? Is it a medical emergency, or something else?" There was a pause, heavy and oppressive. Then came the sound of shuffling papers and soft thumps, like someone falling. Tom's heart raced as he shouted into the phone, "Rebecca. Are you still there? Rebecca." Only silence greeted his cries. The line went dead before Tom could finish his name. A chill gripped him, but it wasn't just from the crisp night air. He tried calling back but received no response. Shaking his head, he stepped outside to check the phone lines. They seemed fine, but something about this call didn't add up. Too late, too specific, and now there was silence. Back inside, Tom scanned his surroundings. The office was empty except for him, save for the flicker of a nearby light. An unease settled over him. He picked up his radio and called in to confirm that he had received an emergency call at 10:42 p.m. from 43 RD Street/Old Mill Road but found no record. Tom's mind raced as he dialed the last digit on the phone, hoping against hope for a response, but again, nothing. As if to taunt him, his office light flickered and went out, leaving only the soft hum of the radio in the darkness. The dispatcher knew something was wrong here, something beyond his usual late-night routine. He reached into the small box beside his desk and pulled out an old, tarnished photo, a faded picture of a woman named Rebecca with a young child, standing outside their small house on 43rd Street. A chill coursed through him. He walked to the window and saw the empty road leading to Old Mill Road. The night was thick with fog, as if something was hiding just beyond his line of sight. He turned back to see the photo again, noticing for the first time a faint scratching sound coming from the corner of the office. Before he could move closer, the door swung open violently and slammed against the wall. A shiver ran down Tom's spine, but he didn't flinch. His gaze landed on the empty chair where Rebecca had been sitting. The phone was still there, just as it had been in that final moment of clarity. And then, a low, raspy whisper filled his ears, "You can't leave alone." Tom's breath caught in his throat, and he whirled around to face the door. It swung shut with a muffled thud, leaving him in absolute darkness and an even deeper cold than before. The only sound was his heavy breathing. Rebecca's voice echoed through the empty office, "Not again." The line went dead once more, but this time it wouldn't be answered. On a cold February night in Wichita, I wasn't sure why my phone was ringing. I sat in my darkened bedroom, hugging the remote to my ear as static crackled through the line. The call ID displayed anonymous, and it was 3:17 a.m. My shift at the warehouse had ended hours ago, yet here I was. "Hello?" I whispered into the phone. The host responded in a calm, unhurried tone, his voice steady even as he waited for me to speak. I hesitated, my eyes darting around the nearly empty room. "Sir, this is Greg." "What?" "Greg, tell me about the warehouse," came the host's low voice. The air in the studio felt thick with anticipation. I sighed and began. It was just another night shift at the box store. I had been working there for years, but something always crept up on me that night. Maybe it was because it was winter, or maybe it was just my nerves kicking into high gear. A soft hum of static filled the line as if the radio itself could feel the tension. The aisles were endless at times, I continued. Especially aisle 42. They'd recently expanded it for a new product line, but the work hadn't ended by closing time. I was assigned to finish up, and as I approached aisle 42, something about it felt different. The host murmured something back, but I barely heard him over the creeping dread in my chest. As I walked down that aisle, it seemed like it just kept going on and on. The fluorescent lights flickered with a faint hum, casting long shadows across the rows of boxes. I tried to keep my pace quick, but my feet felt heavier than usual. My mind wandered, wondering why it was taking so long for someone from security to check in. The host's voice cut through my thoughts. Tell me about that feeling of time stretching out. I don't know, it just felt like I was walking forever, I admitted, the words sticking in my throat. The silence on the other end grew longer than a moment's pause. Suddenly, I heard a sharp intake of breath from the host. Did you ever reach the end? I laughed softly, but my laugh sounded hollow. No. No, I never did. It just kept going and going. And then, my voice broke off as an unfamiliar chill washed over me, like cold fingers tracing down my spine. I had to keep moving, even though it was illogical, I forced out. I could see the end of the aisle in my mind's eye, but no matter how far I walked, it stayed just beyond reach. It was this endless cycle that I couldn't escape. The host's voice was strained now. Did you try to call someone? Yes, and that's when I realized, my words trailed off as I recalled the moment vividly. My phone rang continuously from my pocket, but it didn't work. I tried again and again, but there was no signal in that aisle. The host's voice softened. You stayed out there until you found your way back. No, I whispered, shivering. I woke up the next morning with my shoes still on, not from a nap, but just there. Like I had been sleeping inside one of those aisles for hours. The warehouse had no records of me being seen or heard that night. My voice hitched as the weight of the story pressed down on me. Something was in that aisle. Something that didn't belong to time itself. Greg, why do you think it happened? The host asked. I don't know, I admitted. I've never told anyone about this before. It's just a place that creeps up and stays with you long after it's over. There was no immediate response on the other end. The line hummed with static, almost as if the radio itself knew what was about to come. Are you okay? I asked softly. The host didn't respond for a moment. Tell me, did you see anything? My breath caught in my throat. I don't know. In that endless space, everything was just boxes and shadows. But at the end of it all, there was something. A shape that moved faster than should have been possible through those aisles. Greg, the host said quietly, his voice full of unease, did you ever go back? No. But I never forget that place. And now every time I pass by a long, narrow aisle, even in other stores, my heart skips a beat. The static on the dial of your radio crackled and popped like 1,000 tiny spiders marching across the speaker. I was alone at the Midnight Frequency studio in Nashville, tapping my pen on the armrest as I listened to the empty airwaves. My name is Ethan, and tonight was supposed to be just another late night for me, a faceless host of this phantom call-in radio show that aired only after midnight. I adjusted the mic stand, ensuring it was straight before turning off the lights and settling into my booth. Outside, the city slept under a blanket of dark clouds, rain drizzled against the windows in thin, unsettling lines. The studio felt cold tonight, an eerie chill seeping from somewhere I couldn't quite place. I reached for the phone, intending to check if any listeners had called with tales of the unexplained. But just as my fingers hovered over the receiver, the radio began to hum a faint whisper of static. Curious, I leaned closer, but there was no dial turned or signal switched, nothing that should have caused this disturbance. And then, out of thin air, my own voice started speaking into the microphone. It echoed back to me in a steady, calm tone as if someone else was on the line, but when I glanced at the phone, it showed no caller ID. My voice was soft and controlled, recounting a tale about a haunted house in a small town in Tennessee. The words were mine, yet they were different, more composed, less tired than usual. "Ethan, you're hallucinating," my brain told me. But as I listened, the voice described the old house with vivid, unnerving details, creaking floorboards underfoot, cold air seeping through windows, and a faint whisper that seemed to grow louder over time, even though there was no one else in the booth. I shook my head, trying to snap out of it. "This can't be happening," I muttered aloud. But as soon as the words left my mouth, the voice continued its story about a girl trapped inside the house on Christmas Eve. The tale ended with a sharp cut-off, leaving me alone in darkness with nothing but my own breathing and the unrelenting static. I tried to get up from the booth, to check if I was really alone, but something held me back. My legs felt rooted to the spot, as if someone had cast an invisible spell over me. With trembling hands, I reached for the mic again, intending to power it off or turn on some music to break this eerie silence. But my actions were met with another surprise. The voice began speaking once more, and its words echoed around me in a loop that seemed to have no end. It described the house from a different perspective. This time, someone inside the house was calling out for help. The voice grew urgent, almost desperate, but there was nothing I could do. The realization hit me like a cold fist. My own voice was trapped in some kind of loop, playing back a story that wasn't mine. And now, it seemed to be coming from somewhere else entirely, perhaps a spirit in the house where the old tale took place. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My phone rang suddenly, startling me so much that I dropped it. The caller ID read, "Unknown." I hesitated for a moment before picking up, only to hear my own voice answering back. "Who are you?" I demanded. But the response was chillingly silent. As I listened, the static began to fade out, replaced by the hum of the microphone, still broadcasting. The phone rang again, and this time, there was no one on the other end, just the echo of my own voice, trapped in a cycle that seemed to mock me endlessly with its relentless whisper. And then, as if something had been waiting for me all along, the radio went completely dark. I sat frozen in the booth, alone with only my thoughts and the memory of voices that had never truly left. The nightmare began, but it was no dream. It was a cruel reality that would haunt me until dawn. The phone on the desk rang once more, its silent chimes echoing through the empty studio, leaving me to wonder, was I alone in this booth, or were there spirits trapped within? You're listening to the Midnight Frequency. Keep the lights where they are. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the world slumbers and only the most steadfast souls keep watch, I found myself on U.S. Route 35, that long, winding highway cutting through the heart of West Virginia's misty valleys. It was just past 3 in the morning, my eyes bleary from a night shift at the wheel, yet I needed to clear my head with this final drive home. The toll booth stood silent and uninviting, its canopy casting an eerie shadow across the asphalt. As I approached, the radio played static that felt like a hollow whisper, as if even the airwaves were reluctant witnesses. I slowed down, coming to a halt with a soft squeak of tires against the worn concrete. The booth was dark inside. A single light bulb hung overhead, illuminating enough for me to see the figure behind the desk, the toll taker. The attendant's face was obscured by shadows, yet something about their presence made my skin prickle. I reached into my pocket and fumbled with my change, my fingers hesitating over the coins. "Good night," I called softly, trying to mask my unease. The attendant didn't respond immediately. Instead, they leaned forward slightly, their voice barely audible but clear as a bell. "Your turn." I passed the quarters across the glass barrier, feeling a strange heaviness in my hand. As soon as my coins reached them, they disappeared. I turned to look and saw only darkness, no reflection of anyone at all. That's when the dread crept up on me like a silent shadow. The toll booth was empty, no one should be there at that hour, but somehow, a change had been made. I swallowed hard, my breath visible in the cool night air. "Are you sure this is normal?" I asked again, more urgently now. No answer. Silence hung heavy as a 1,000-pound weight. I glanced back at the booth, searching for any sign of movement or life, but it remained steadfastly dark and empty. With my heart pounding in my ears, I reached into my pocket once more, now empty. No coins, no money left behind by the unseen hand that had just vanished mine. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, and I clutched the steering wheel, willing myself to keep calm. But as I stepped out of the car and approached the booth again, I heard a faint hiss, like steam escaping from thin air, and the interior lights flickered, casting an odd green glow that seemed to crawl over the walls. My phone rang then, a shrill, persistent ring echoing through the empty toll plaza. It was my home number. My heart leapt as I fumbled with the unlock feature on the screen, finally grasping it and pressing the answer button. "Hello?" I whispered into the night, my voice trembling. "Are you okay? Why are you calling from a pay phone? You're not supposed to have your car here." It was my younger sister's worried voice, her words laced with concern. I looked down at the booth again, still empty. The green light blinked steadily, mocking me in its silence. And then, before I could respond, the line went dead. The toll booth between midnight and 4, silent and holding secrets that would never be shared, remained a ghostly echo of itself as my car sped away into the early morning darkness. The phone rang twice before she picked up. It was 3:08 a.m., and her name was Tessa. She worked the night shift as a janitor at the Grand Theater in Nashville, a venue that hosted everything from rock concerts to classic film screenings. Tessa wiped sweat from her brow and looked around the empty lobby. The only sound was the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant, echoing laughter from a late-night comedy show. It was quiet enough to hear her own breath as she dialed the number for the late-night paranormal radio show. "Good evening," murmured the voice on the other end, his tone calm but with an unmistakable undercurrent of curiosity. "It's Tessa," she began, her voice steady despite the creeping sense of unease. "From the Grand Theater." "I hear you," came the reply, and for a moment, she felt as though he could see her standing there alone in the theater's deserted halls. Tessa told him about the noise that wouldn't stop in the third-floor auditorium, soft clapping, like the audience applauding. She was familiar with applause, having cleaned up after shows herself, but this was different. It sounded mechanical, as if someone, was deliberately making that sound over and over. "Why do you think it's happening?" the host asked, his voice softening her jitters a little. "I don't know," she admitted, her grip tightening on the phone. "It's weird." She had noticed it 3 nights in a row now, a small clapping in one corner of the theater as if someone was appreciating a performance. She tried to ignore it but couldn't escape the feeling that something wasn't right. "I just started cleaning this morning," she continued, her voice growing more urgent. "I've gone through all the regular noises and dust. This is new." The host paused for a moment before speaking again. "Did you find anything unusual when you tried to trace it?" Tessa thought back to her inspections, her flashlight moving along each row of seats, down the center aisle. She had even gone up to the stage and peered behind the curtains but found nothing out of place. "Nope," she admitted reluctantly. "No one's been here except me." She paused, thinking about that odd moment again. The clapping seemed to grow louder, like a distant echo in an empty space. "And then there was this," Tessa said, her voice tinged with fear. "It's just strange because it sounds like someone is doing some kind of ritual. Almost as if they're trying to show approval or gratitude." The host took a thoughtful pause, his words measured and slow. "Have you tried checking the security footage from earlier tonight?" "No," she admitted quickly. Her heart raced at the thought of turning on cameras in this eerie silence. "Do it tomorrow," he suggested gently. "It might provide some clues." She hung up, her mind racing with the implications. As she turned off the lights and headed for the door, Tessa felt a chill sweep through her. The clapping had stopped, but now she heard another sound, footsteps. No. It couldn't be. But then, the clapping started again, louder this time, almost as if someone was trying to get her attention. She turned and saw nothing out of place in the dark corridor behind her. And just like that, Tessa felt the ground give way beneath her feet. She stumbled and dropped the phone. A low, echoing laugh filled the darkness before she heard a whisper, "Thank you for listening." The phone clattered to the ground, shattered into pieces. The night was as still as a tomb when I heard it, 3 minutes past 3. The clock on my wall ticked just once before silence swallowed all sound like a dark chasm. I lay in bed, wide awake and staring at the ceiling, knowing exactly why I couldn't sleep. Ever since last summer, when I took the night shift at Baker's Bistro, that sound had become part of my daily routine. The delivery man would arrive each evening without fail, his knock as regular as the pendulum of a grandfather clock. But tonight was different. Tonight, there was no knock. And no one ever missed an evening shift. I threw off the covers and padded barefoot to the back door. The static hum of the radio in my ear pressed on like a weight. I turned it down, it only served as a lullaby, the soothing music masking the silence that should have been filled with the usual jingle. There was no one out there now, only the crisp night air that smelled faintly of rain and old stone. I reached for my phone and dialed the number to the bistro. It rang twice before someone picked up. Baker's Bistro, a young voice answered, sounding just like it had during training nights. "Hey, it's Jordan. I didn't hear the delivery guy knock at 3:03 tonight. Usually he's here right on time." The silence that followed made my skin prickle with unease. I cleared my throat and spoke again, but still no reply. My heart quickened, each beat echoing in my ears. Had something happened to him? "Is everything okay, Jordan?" Another pause. And then a voice I couldn't place said, "Just keep an eye out. We'll figure it out later." The line went dead. The only sound was the static of the radio playing softly, like some distant, mocking laughter. I stepped outside and looked up at Baker's Bistro. The building stood tall against the night sky, windows unlit except for one flickering light in the kitchen. It had been dark before, but now it seemed to pulse with an inner life that was anything but calm. A chill ran down my spine as I noticed something odd. The door to the back storage room was slightly ajar. Normally locked at night, it hadn't even creaked open. Had someone, or something, been there? My stomach tightened into knots, and I took a deep breath. I reached for the handle of the storage room, my hand trembling. As I pulled it wide, the air inside wasn't as cold as I expected. Instead, it felt heavy, almost. A musty scent wafted out, like old books and stale coffee. I stepped in and closed the door behind me. In the dim light of a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, everything looked normal. But something was wrong with the wall. Just above my head, there was an indentation, a small, darkened patch that hadn't been there before. It almost looked like a hand had pressed into the plaster. A low growl echoed through the storage room, making me jump. For a moment, I thought it might be just the sound of static from the radio in my ear. But then it came again. A deeper, more guttural growl. This time, it seemed to come from within the wall itself. I turned around slowly, heart pounding in my ears. The only thing between me and whatever was making that noise was a thin sheet of wood. I reached out with one hand, fingers brushing against the rough grain of the wall. Something tugged at me, like an unseen presence tugging back. It was as if the wall itself was trying to communicate. My breath caught in my throat as I pulled away. A single word echoed through the silent room, Baker. The name hung there, heavy with significance and something else, a warning or a promise. But before I could make sense of it, another knock sounded from outside the back door. It was soft at first, almost inaudible, but quickly grew louder and more insistent. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet as fear gripped me. The knocking came again, harder this time, jarring against the back door. "Open up," someone called out. A voice I didn't recognize, distorted and urgent. I turned to face the wall that had become a portal of sorts. Whatever, or whoever, was on the other side was desperate for entry. And yet, as if by some unspoken agreement, no one seemed willing to fully open the door. The knocking ceased just as abruptly as it started, leaving only the sound of my ragged breathing and the static-filled radio whispering promises of nothing but empty air. The night was as quiet as the grave when Betty dialed. The line crackled and whispered back, a faint hiss of static carrying just enough echo to make her fingers fidget over the receiver. She sat at her desk in the darkened office of the Estes Park Motel, where she had been working this long shift. A chill slid down her spine as she heard the familiar metallic ding from inside the hotel elevator. "Operator?" Betty spoke into the cold air. There was a pause. Then, a voice, a man's deep whisper, came through the receiver. "You're calling the Estes Park Motel?" Betty swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the moment settle heavily on her chest. She cleared her throat, trying to steady her voice. "Yes. I'm in room 217. Silence. Suddenly, the elevator began its soft mechanical groan and she heard a series of clicks that seemed to come from within the depths of the building itself. Then, in a strange mix of tones, the operator spoke again, his words carrying an eerie calmness. "Your floor is closing." Before Betty could respond, she heard the ominous sound of metal on metal as the elevator doors began to close with a slow and deliberate precision. Betty's heart pounded as she hurriedly typed out her address in case they needed to contact her. The line was completely silent now except for the faint hum of the phone cradled between her ear and shoulder. The elevator had reached floor 6, but no doors opened. Instead, there was a mechanical whir that sent shivers down her spine. Then, with another metallic ring of the bell, it began to descend again. She couldn't tear herself away from the receiver. The line remained dead, except for the occasional static crackle. Betty's eyes darted to the door as she waited, a growing sense of dread that was almost palpable in the air around her. Then, without warning, the elevator stopped again. This time, it had reached floor 7, a floor completely sealed off from the rest of the building since the old manager had retired decades ago. Betty's hand clutched the receiver tighter as she heard the elevator doors begin to open. Panic bubbled up within her, but she forced herself to listen. There was a muffled groan, and then the sound of shuffling feet. Betty held her breath as the operator spoke once more, a raspy whisper that sent chills down her spine. The floors are choosing their own path. Before Betty could even consider hanging up, the elevator doors slid open silently. She stood there, rooted to the spot, staring into the abyss of an unlit and abandoned hallway. And then, the line went dead. This next call came in just after 3, the hour they say the veil is thinnest. It was 2:30 a.m. in the small Nebraska town of Beatrice, and I wasn't where I should be, safely tucked into bed at home. No, I found myself in a field on the outskirts of town, under the piercing blue sky of an almost full moon. The night air was cold, and my fingers were stiff as I worked to finish the last of the day's repairs on the telephone lines. The small truck's engine hummed softly in the quiet, broken only by the distant sound of crickets. I was alone, just me and the empty highway stretching away into the distance like a lonely path to some forgotten destination. The field was silent, save for the occasional car passing by on the nearby road, its headlights leaving trails of light across the tall grass. I had been called out that evening to fix a line that kept cutting off calls from a local nursing home. As I approached the first pole, something gnawed at the back of my mind, a feeling of being watched, as if eyes were staring down at me without moving. The sensation was vague and hard to pin down, but it wouldn't let go. As I climbed the first utility pole, I reached for a set of wire cutters. But before I could grab them, a soft, almost whispering voice sounded from behind me. "Don't." Startled, I whirled around. The field was empty, no one else was there. I shook it off and finished my task quickly, moving on to the next pole where a knot of tension tightened in my chest. The phone rang again as I reached the third pole. This time, I hesitated. Something had shifted in the atmosphere, a presence that was less tangible but more insistent than before. My flashlight beam swept over the ground, illuminating the dark grass and shadows. It didn't belong here, this feeling, not on an ordinary night in Beatrice. With a sigh, I grabbed for my phone and answered. "Lineman 27 here," I said into the receiver. "Listen carefully, Jack," came the whisper again. The voice was faint but clear as it cut through the static on the line. "Something is coming." My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to shake off the cold shiver that ran down my spine. "I can't hear anything," I said, fumbling for an explanation. "Look back," the voice urged softly. I swung around, but there was nothing, no one behind me. Just silence. The air smelled of wet grass and the distant metallic tang of old wiring. Yet, I felt as if something unseen was watching over my shoulder. As I turned to face the next pole, the phone rang again with a shrill, dissonant note that cut through the otherwise peaceful night. "Jack," it whispered once more. "Don't look back." With shaking hands, I began to climb down the pole. The first few steps were easy, but as I reached for the ground, I felt an unseen force tugging at my legs. My heart raced, and a bead of sweat trickled down my forehead. I scrambled off the pole and turned around, ready to face whatever was there. But nothing waited for me in the dark. The field seemed normal again, just an ordinary Nebraska night with an ordinary lineman on an ordinary shift. Or so it should have been. Suddenly, the ground beneath my feet gave way slightly, sending me stumbling forward. I fell hard onto the grass and scrambled to my knees, looking wildly around. But there was nothing but the cold night air and the whispering voice that now seemed to be in my head. "Jack," it said again. "Don't look back." The last words echoed faintly before fading into nothingness. As I lay there on the cool earth, something else settled in, the realization that I might never know what, or who, was lurking just out of sight. The midnight host's voice hums into the static of my radio. "Good evening, Sarah. You've reached the midnight frequency." If you've got a story about the unexplained, late night can be your time to share. Sarah's voice wavers over the crackly line as she begins her tale. I was working that night at the pharmacy in Louisville. Just another night, really, but something didn't feel right. She tells of the shift starting normally, a steady flow of patients and prescriptions. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting an eerie glow through the rows of pill bottles and medicine cabinets. Her co-workers mumbled greetings as they settled into their tasks, unaware that today might hold a story best left untold. The hours ticked by until it was 3:20 in the morning, when Mrs. Dolores Walker approached the counter. An elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes, she always brought a small bag of candy for her favorite pharmacy worker. You should take this, she said, handing Sarah a prescription bottle. Sarah scanned the label. Her hands trembled as she read, for Mrs. Dolores. 1 tablet every 8 hours. Refills to be taken after consultation with your physician. A chill ran down her spine. Something was wrong. Mrs. Dolores had never come in for refills before, and she died that morning, alone in her small apartment. The city medical examiner found no signs of foul play. Her death was listed as natural causes, but Sarah's gut told a different story. Sarah, are you okay? The host asks over the static. She swallows hard. It's just. I can't shake this feeling. Like I should have known something. Another pause as if time stretches in the air. The host says softly, go on, Sarah. The night grew colder, and the radio static crept closer. Sarah turned her head toward a window, the moon casting long shadows on the linoleum floor. She saw nothing, but the unease gnawed at her. Mrs. Dolores's prescription should have been in her bag of candies, her usual thank you gesture. Sarah reaches into the bag again, this time finding only an empty bottle. The host asks if she remembers when it was last full, and Sarah hesitates before answering, I think it was just after I filled Mrs. Dolores's prescription that night. The host's voice is almost a whisper now. You're sure? Yes, she whispers back. I'm sure. More static, the hiss of air conditioning humming through the background. The host lets out a slow breath over the line. Sarah, did you? But before he can finish, her phone rings again, cutting him off. She picks up the receiver, and the sound of her breathing fills the void between them. Hello? Hello? She says into the air. The host's voice is calm but urgent. Sarah, this isn't right. Do you want me to call you back? She can barely hear him over the echo in her ear. No. I just need a moment. She hangs up and steps away from the counter. The room feels thick with silence as she stands by the emergency exit door, her fingers brushing against the handle. Her mind races through possibilities, none of them comforting. Did you really know something? Or was it just a hunch? The host's voice questions softly. Sarah's grip tightens around the cold metal door handle. I don't know, she replies. But I'm going to find out. The radio line goes dead. The static swells, and the quiet of the pharmacy surrounds her once more, forever unresolved. At 2 in the morning, when the world was still a hush of silence, Jack had made his usual route. The lot attendant was a solitary job, often done by people looking for peace or escape. Tonight, though, something felt off. Jack's shift at the Detroit airport parking garage was always a routine affair, headphones in, scanning license plates until the next vehicle pulled out. His walk was rhythmic, steady as his heartbeat, but tonight, every step seemed to be met with an oppressive weight of unease. The lights of the city reflected off the wet concrete, casting eerie shadows through the empty rows of parked cars. Jack's mind wandered briefly, wondering if he had left a window open at home or if he should have taken that last sip of coffee before turning out the lights. Then his eyes caught on it, an old sedan, a dark blue '85 Chevy Caprice Classic, sitting directly in front of the exit booth. Most cars left soon enough, but this one. It was as if it had planted its tires in concrete. Jack approached slowly, not trusting his instincts to mislead him. As he got closer, he noticed the driver's side door was slightly ajar, just enough for someone to have hurriedly stepped out. Inside, however, the interior lights remained on. Jack hesitated, then placed an open hand on the car's window. It was warm. His breath fanned over his hand, creating small fog patterns on the glass. He touched the seat and felt a similar warmth, persistent despite the chill of night outside. He scanned the area but saw no one. "Hello?" he called out quietly. The only reply was a distant siren fading from the main street. Jack's radio began to static, crackling as if protesting his intrusion into this eerie silence. Squinting through the darkness, Jack saw a faint figure approaching. He recognized it before it came closer, an elderly woman, her movements stiff and unnatural, like she hadn't walked in decades. Her eyes stared blankly ahead. "Ma'am," he whispered, reaching out to touch her shoulder. She flinched violently, causing him to jump back with a startled cry. The static on the radio grew louder, blaring white noise that drowned out whatever was happening next. Jack watched as the elderly woman's body stiffened and she collapsed onto the warm car seat. The door slammed shut with a dull thud, sealing her inside. Jack's mind raced, trying to comprehend what had just unfolded. But before he could even process his shock, the car shifted gears and slowly pulled out of its spot, leaving Jack alone in the parking garage, surrounded by the cold night air and the static-filled radio that refused to give him any answers. And there she sat, driving off into the dark, with no hope of an explanation. In the dim glow of my kitchen light, I stared at the food on the table as if it were something strange and new. It was a late shift, and the house was quiet except for the distant hum of the refrigerator. "My name is Sarah, and I work nights at the old cafe downtown." The place had seen better days, with peeling wallpaper and faded checkerboard floors. I was alone, but my coworkers always said spirits lingered here. The phone rang, its old cordless echo bouncing off empty walls. It startled me. It was so rare to get calls in the middle of the night. "Hello?" I asked, my voice hesitant. "Ma'am. This is Pete, from the diner downtown. You left some biscuits and coffee on the counter for a customer." I paused, remembering vaguely. "Right, did something happen with that order?" "Not exactly," he said slowly. "The biscuits were gone before you could see them, but not by a regular hand. They looked like they'd been nibbled around. And then there was this coffee cup. Someone must have taken a sip because it's empty, right?" his voice trailing off. I stepped closer to the counter, my breath catching. "How late is it?" I asked, staring at the spot where Pete said the biscuits had gone. "Almost 1 in the morning. That's why I'm calling you now." My stomach churned as I examined the table. The last sip of coffee was just a few millimeters short of the rim, and there were crumbs, tiny morsels that seemed to have been picked away by unseen fingers. It doesn't make sense," I whispered. A chill ran down my spine. I remember feeling alone in those walls, like no one else existed but me and this odd, almost eerie situation. The phone rang again, startling me out of my thoughts. I answered quickly, hoping for an explanation. "Ma'am. Did you check the back door?" His voice was firm, urgent. I blinked, looking behind me. "No." "Why?" "Because someone's trying to get in." There was a momentary pause on the line, and then, "Sarah." Before I could answer, the phone clicked off. I stood there frozen, the sound of my own breathing echoing through the empty cafe. Slowly, I turned around to see what he meant. The back door was ajar, just as Pete said it would be. The night air was cold and still, but inside the diner, something felt different. A faint whisper of an unknown presence hung in the stale air. My heart pounded against my ribcage, each beat a reminder that I wasn't alone anymore. I cautiously made my way to the back door, holding onto the handle with both hands. The cold metal seemed to pulse under my touch. As I opened it, a shiver ran down my spine. Something invisible had been inside too. And when I stepped outside, I could see why. The ground was covered in faint footprints leading away from the cafe, each one delicate and perfectly placed as if by unseen hands. The path wound through an old overgrown garden towards a small, abandoned cottage at the end of the property. My breath caught in my throat as I realized no one else had left them there. I stared at those prints, wondering what they meant. Then, something stirred inside me, a small sense of duty, perhaps. Or maybe just plain curiosity. Whatever it was, it led me toward that cottage. It's not a story with neat closure, but the lingering feeling in my bones, of something watching, waiting, remains. A chill still lingers on the cold night air, hinting at whispers and unexplained disappearances that will always linger just outside our world of light and reason. If you're still with us, good. A lot of people stopped listening alone after this one. In the cold, deserted terminal of Anchorage International Airport, Sarah felt the chill pierce her coat even deeper than usual. She was alone, working the night shift on Christmas Eve. The last flight had left hours ago, and most passengers were long gone. Yet one gate agent, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone, was watching from a distance. The empty hallways echoed with her footsteps, each step resonating through the vast, silent space. Her breath came out in white plumes, like tiny ghosts floating away into the night. Sarah shivered, pushing those odd thoughts aside and focusing on the routine of closing down the terminal. As she approached the last gate, Gate 7A, a sudden wave of unease washed over her. It wasn't just the usual fatigue or the solitary nature of this quiet job, it was something tangible, something that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She hesitated at the threshold, her hand hovering over the door handle. Why did I stop? She asked herself silently, as if someone else's voice might carry the answer through the empty expanse. The door creaked softly when she finally pushed it open. A faint, almost invisible smell of cigarette smoke lingered in the air, mingling with the usual lingering odors of the airport, cleaner, disinfectant, and an undertone of metal polish. The room was unoccupied, save for a lone desk where a small red light blinked, indicating that everything was turned off. Strange, she whispered, moving closer to the desk. Her flashlight beam swept across the paperwork and empty chairs. But there was one thing that shouldn't be here. A single row of seats, positioned precisely where Gate 7A should have been, stood silent and unoccupied. The rows were neatly aligned, and each seat looked untouched, as if a line of people had just boarded their flight. The feeling of presence grew stronger with the realization. Why can't I remember this? Sarah muttered, her voice echoing in the empty room. It was then that she noticed something written on the board at the end of the row, Merry Christmas from Flight 172. Flight 172 was a non-existent flight. A quick glance back through her notes showed no such scheduled departure. The last real flight had been an hour earlier. Who would leave this here, she wondered aloud, her flashlight beam tracing the path to the door again. As if in response, the red light on the desk flickered once and then went out, leaving the terminal in complete darkness save for the pale moonlight filtering through a high window. Sarah grabbed her coat more tightly, not wanting to face what might be waiting outside the terminal. But as she stepped towards the door, the hairs on her arms bristled again. Something, or someone, was watching from the shadows, and it wasn't going away. She turned, about to leave, but paused when a faint whisper seemed to carry through the air, "Merry Christmas." The whisper was so quiet that if she hadn't been listening intently, she might have missed it altogether. But it left an unsettling echo in her mind, a reminder of what lay hidden in the silence. And then, before Sarah could take another step, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The sound echoed through the empty terminal as though someone had dropped it from behind. She spun around, heart racing, but found no one there. The light from her flashlight flickered wildly as she backed towards the far corner of the room, each breath growing more ragged. And then, just as suddenly, everything went black. The silence that followed was absolute, filled only with the ticking of a timepiece somewhere in the recesses of her mind. She stood there, in the dark and unexplainable stillness, until she could no longer hear her own heartbeat. And when it came back, it was accompanied by another whisper, "Merry Christmas." Sarah didn't wait for it to say anything else before she fled the terminal, leaving behind only the sound of her frantic footsteps and the ghostly seat row that seemed to smile at her in the empty darkness. It was late, past midnight in Newport, Rhode Island. I, Susan Jenkins, had volunteered as a guard at the Newport Historical Society's Grand Museum. The place had always been eerie, but tonight, it felt different. My footsteps echoed on the polished wooden floor of the main hall. The only sounds were the distant ticking of grandfather clocks and my breathing. A chill snaked up my spine despite the warmth of my coat. I began my rounds at 7 o'clock. The museum was vast, 6 floors crammed with artifacts, paintings, and relics from Newport's storied past. I had been here countless nights before, but tonight felt off. The portraits in particular seemed more lifelike than usual. The eyes of the subjects caught the light as if watching me. My flashlight beam cast dancing shadows on the wall as I made my way to the 3rd floor. There were 3 paintings of notables, hanging side by side along one corridor: Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry, Nathaniel Greene, and Rebecca Nurse. Each was a masterpiece, but tonight, Rebecca Nurse's portrait seemed different. Her eyes followed me, her gaze never straying from mine. I completed 2 rounds before the final check, a security protocol mandated for my shift. Walking back to the main floor, I passed by the gallery of portraits again. As my hand touched the doorknob, I felt an odd sensation, a tingle, like a cold breath on my wrist. The painting had changed positions ever so slightly. Rebecca Nurse's head now rested against Perry's shoulder, her eyes still firmly fixed on me. The chill intensified as soon as I stepped through the door. My flashlight flickered for a moment before stabilizing. Empty rooms loomed ahead. It was late, nearly 3 in the morning, but the building should have been quiet. Yet there was an oppressive silence that made my skin crawl. I continued my rounds, moving cautiously down each corridor. The museum's collection of antique clocks kept a solemn watch over their exhibits. Each tick seemed to echo louder than it should, as if the very time itself held its breath. In one section, I paused before an ornate grandfather clock. Its hands were almost at midnight, exactly 2 hours later than when I started my rounds. I noted this and moved on, but the passage of time felt elongated, stretched to accommodate an underlying unease. Reaching the 2nd floor, I stopped in front of a display case containing a small, ornate locket. The room was empty, but as I reached for it, there was a faint whisper, so quiet my mind almost missed it. It sounded like the wind, or perhaps, human breath. It came from behind me. Heart pounding, I whirled around to see nothing, a single wall bathed in moonlight through an uncurtained window. The whisper intensified, growing louder, closer. I dropped the locket, my flashlight clattering onto a nearby shelf. In the darkness, something stirred beside me, a shadowy shape barely distinguishable from the night. I tried to scream but no sound escaped. Instead, a cold wind swept through the hall, sending shivers down my spine and scattering papers across the floor. The shape resolved, a tall figure wrapped in an old-fashioned coat, face obscured by a hood. The figure turned its head slightly, eyes hidden beneath the brim. As I stared back, the figure tilted its head in acknowledgement before vanishing as suddenly as it had appeared. In its wake, the room was plunged into complete darkness, save for my flashlight beam on the floor. The locket lay silent and unscathed. I rushed to find light, a window shattered, glass crunching underfoot. Through the broken pane, a faint moonlit shadow of what seemed like a person raced across the grass outside. The static of my radio returned, filling the empty hall. It was 4 a.m, but I knew I couldn't go back to sleep tonight. The museum still stood silent, its secrets unspoken and waiting. 3 a.m. on an empty stretch of highway near Barstow, California. I, Jake Miller, pull into a gas station that looks like it hasn't seen daylight since Elvis was king. The air is as cool and still as the desert can be in midwinter. The only sound, apart from the faint hum of my truck's engine, is the static crackle coming through the old radio tuned to the midnight frequency. Hello. I murmur into my phone, cradling it against my ear like a lifeline. Who is this? Is there anyone on the other end? The host sounds calm and authoritative, his voice as thick with experience as an evening of cheap bourbon. Jake Miller speaking, calling in from Barstow. Do you have a story for us tonight? I take a deep breath, trying to steady my racing thoughts. Yeah, it's about this shower. And then I begin to tell the tale. It started one night on that same lonely stretch of road. My truck was parked at the gas station, and as I lay in my bunk preparing to sleep, I heard it, a faint hiss coming from the bathroom. At first, I thought it might be an old pipe, but then I realized it sounded like running water. I got out of bed, grabbed my flashlight, and made my way down the hall. The door was ajar just enough for light to spill into the empty hallway. Without thinking, I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The room was dark, save for a single, flickering fluorescent light high on the ceiling. I shone the beam around, but there was nothing unusual at first glance. Then I heard it again, the unmistakable sound of water running. I turned to leave, hand already reaching for the doorknob. Is that your shower? No answer came. The only sound now was the dripping water. I stepped closer and saw something that made my blood run cold. The shower door was bolted from the inside. I tried to open it again but with no luck. It was as if someone, or something, was stopping me, trapping me in a room without a way out. The running water grew louder, more distinct, like someone was scrubbing away in there, alone and unaware of my presence. A chill swept through the room, heavy and unrelenting. I reached for my phone, desperate to find help, but it wouldn't ring. The battery must have died hours ago. My flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the cracked tiles as the water continued its steady, maddening flow. The minutes stretched into an eternity. I closed my eyes, willing myself to wake up from this nightmare. But when I opened them again, everything was just the same, a cold, dimly lit bathroom with water running in a room bolted shut on the inside. I don't know how long I stood there, but eventually, the sound of the shower stopped. Complete silence filled the room, except for my ragged breathing and the pounding in my temples. Slowly, I backed out of the bathroom, shutting the door behind me with a hollow click that echoed through the empty hall. As I returned to my bunk, the light from the hallway illuminated my face in stark relief. The shower had run, but no one answered when I called for help. It was just another night on the road, another mystery. But sometimes, even at 3 a.m., in an old gas station, it feels like something is always watching. The phone in my hand still refused to work. As if reading my mind, the host's voice floated back into the room. "That sounds quite unusual, Jake. I hope you're safe and sound." I hung up without saying goodbye, knowing that whatever was in that bathroom, whatever it was still out there, waiting. And now, as I write this on paper and wait for the midnight frequency to begin again, the shower continues to run, but nobody answers. The soft hum of the night, a comforting lullaby in Akron's quiet industrial park, was suddenly shattered. I had just clicked off the television and was settling into my old recliner, preparing to catch up on some much-needed sleep. The air conditioning made an echoing whine as it kicked in, the only sound in the mostly empty server room. It was 4:03 a.m. That's when I first heard it, a soft tap, tap, tapping. At first, I thought it might have been my imagination, a residual echo from earlier conversations. But then, there it was again, louder this time. Not just once but several more times, in quick succession. It sounded like typing, like someone, or something, typing on the old-fashioned terminals that lined the walls of this long-neglected space. The power to these terminals was cut off months ago, and yet here it was, the rhythm of fingers dancing across keypads as if they had a life of their own. My heart sank. I've been working night shifts for over 2 years now, but no one else knew about this place. It was my sanctuary, an escape from the world outside where everything seemed to go to sleep and logic reigned supreme. But tonight, something wasn't right. The tapping grew louder as if the unseen fingers were getting closer, moving towards me. My phone rang, a sharp, jarring noise that cut through the silence like a knife. I jumped, nearly falling from my chair, and answered it with trembling hands. "Hello." Static crackled on the line, followed by a brief pause before the operator's voice came through, muffled as if she were speaking into a tin can. "You have reached a disconnected number. Please hang up and try again." A chill ran down my spine. There was no one in here but me. I could hear the typing almost distinctly now, like fingers sliding over plastic keys, each tap sending chills down my neck. I tried to keep my breathing steady as I slowly turned around, peering into the gloom of the room. The old monitors had been off for so long that their screens were a dim blue haze, but there was no mistaking those keystrokes. The tapping stopped abruptly, and in its place, an oppressive silence descended. My skin crawled, sweat prickling on my arms as I stood up to investigate further. My flashlight clicked on, cutting through the dark with a weak beam. I moved slowly towards the center of the room where the terminals were. Each one had a faint blue glow from what remained of its old monitor, but nothing was lit. Yet, there it was, typing, rhythmic and deliberate. I approached one terminal, my hand hovering above the keys, ready to touch if necessary. But as I closed in, the typing stopped again, replaced by an eerie whispering in my mind, a voice so quiet that only I could hear its words, "They won't leave until you do." My breath caught, and I turned back towards the entrance, moving swiftly but silently. The phone rang once more, and this time, a faint echo of laughter came through the line before it went dead. I stepped out into the hallway, heart pounding in my chest. A sense of dread clung to me like fog. As I walked back to my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for me, something that shouldn't be here at all. "Don't touch that dial. Stay with me, the next one is worse." The cold night air seeped through the gaps in my coat as I trudged home along the deserted highway. At 2 a.m., most of Louisville was tucked into bed, save for the occasional car whispering by on the nearby road. Suddenly, a faint noise, something metallic jangling, bounced across the empty space between us. My heart jolted, and my breath hitched in my throat. I slowed to a halt, straining to listen through the radio static that crackled like autumn leaves on an icy morning. I had just finished my night shift at the old Lincoln County morgue, where I'd worked for 3 years now. The building was as ancient as the county itself, with walls layered in stories of death and redemption. Tonight, all the stories seemed to whisper, "You are not alone." My fingers tightened on the handle of my utility belt, feeling the weight of the penlight clipped there. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Had it been that old call bell? A relic from another era, maybe from when families clamored for a final glimpse before the doors closed forever. The bell should have been locked away in storage by now. I quickened my pace, heading directly to my car parked on the other side of the road. As I walked past the morgue's front doors, I caught sight of something out of place, a familiar drawer on the ground near the door, open and jingling like a small bell inside. My blood turned to ice as I approached it. The drawer's interior was indeed empty save for the faint clinking from the metal strip at its bottom. Heart pounding like an engine in overdrive, I reached out slowly and pulled the drawer all the way back. The clink of coins echoed briefly before fading away into silence. My eyes darted around, searching for any sign that someone, something, had been moving inside. But the hallway was still as empty as the room behind. I shivered, wrapping my arms tighter around myself as I stuffed my hands into my pockets and hurried toward the car. The radio in my coat pocket crackled weakly, static biting at the edges of the quiet night. My breath fogged up in front of me, forming an unnatural cloud amidst the clear air. "Hello," I whispered into the radio, hoping to break the eerie silence, but only a brief hiss met my plea. The phone sat there, seemingly alone under the streetlight that cast its glow like a pale ghost across the empty parking lot. I climbed into my old sedan and started the engine, letting it warm up slightly as I dialed the number for the midnight frequency, my voice trembling just enough to make me cringe. The static hissed in my ear, mocking silence pressing against the line until finally, a familiar voice answered, "Good evening, caller." "Is something wrong?" the host asked softly. I let out a hollow laugh that sounded more like a sob. "It's the bell," I managed to choke out. "It rang just before I left tonight. The last shift before he quit. Not because of money or boredom, but something else, something unseen." It was a clear February night, and the small town of Hollow Creek barely stirred as I drove home from the local factory. The streets emptied into rows of houses huddled around dim street lamps. My truck hummed along Route 63, its headlights slicing through the icy shadows, illuminating an old two-story house half obscured by trees. I worked the graveyard shift at the factory just a few miles down, making metal parts for the defense industry. The job was steady and not too taxing, but there had been something eerie about that night, a sense of eyes on me, always watching. The radio crackled softly in the dark car, its static cutting through the silence like a blade. I switched to an oldies station playing soft jazz. The announcer's voice drifted into the background as I turned down the volume. That's when it started. First, a faint humming noise, almost imperceptible. It ticked up gradually, and before long, it sounded like someone was tapping on my window, over and over. My heart pounded in the thick silence of the night. "Mr. Jones?" The voice came from the radio, muffled but insistent. The DJ sounded like he was calling out into the void, as if no one was home. "Stay safe, Mr. Jones." My name on the air, spoken to a void. I laughed it off, thinking it must be someone else sharing the same station, playing an odd prank. But then, my phone buzzed in my pocket. In those days, calls were few during late hours. I hesitated, but something made me reach for it. The caller ID read unknown. "Hello," I said into the darkness, my voice echoing faintly through the truck. "Mr. Jones, you're not alone." It was a female voice, calm and deliberate. "Be careful on your way home." I tried to joke, but my own voice sounded strained. "Who is this? Are you playing a trick?" "No tricks," she replied. "Stay safe until morning." The call cut off before I could ask any more questions. That was when the tapping resumed, louder than ever. It came from outside, from every direction at once. My truck door, my window, even the dashboard seemed to rattle with a ghostly presence. My breath caught as the hum grew more intense, like a swarm of bees buzzing around me, growing louder and closer. I pulled over on the empty highway, trying to get out of the truck in one piece. The tapping stopped abruptly, replaced by a sense of something cold pressing against my leg. I shivered despite the warmth inside the truck. "Don't leave," said the voice from somewhere in the dark. "Not yet." With that, the humming ceased entirely, and the only sound was the wind whispering through the trees. My phone rang again, this time with a real number, 911. I hesitated, knowing what I would see when I turned on my flashlight or stepped out of the vehicle to check the truck's exterior. But before I could summon the courage, the tapping resumed inside, growing in intensity until it was like tiny stones were being thrown against the metal walls, one after another. I gripped the steering wheel, willing myself not to panic. My last shift ended that night. The radio played quietly in the background, static filling the void. I dialed 911 and waited for the dispatcher to pick up. 911, what's your emergency? My voice was low, barely audible over the tapping. I don't feel well. And that's where we'll close the lines for tonight. If you made it this far, if you're still here in the dark with me, then you're one of us now. The ones who listen after midnight. The ones who don't quite turn the radio all the way off. Before you go, do one thing. Subscribe, and turn on the bell. Every week we bring another lost night back from the static, and you don't want to miss the frequency when it opens again. Until then, keep a light on. Check the locks. And if your phone rings after 3, and there's only static on the other end, you don't have to answer. This has been the Midnight Frequency. Good night. And sleep with the radio on.